The sun dipped below the jagged peaks of the Black Hills, casting long shadows across the rocky terrain as the wind howled through the pines. The air smelled of damp earth and pine needles, the kind of scent that clung to everything in these parts: clothes, skin, even the memories of those who dared to call this wilderness home. Elias and Caleb Carter, the mountain man twins, moved silently through the underbrush, their moccasined feet barely disturbing the forest floor. They were tracking something, or rather, someone. Ahead of them, the faintest rustle of fabric against bark gave away the position of their quarry. The twins exchanged a glance, their weathered faces etched with determination. They had been following the bandits since dawn, ever since they'd stumbled upon the raided Cherokee village at the edge of the valley. Most of the villagers had scattered into the hills, but the bandits had taken one of the girls, a fiery-haired Cherokee lass no older than 21, her spirit as untamed as the land itself. Elias had seen the way she'd fought, even as they dragged her onto a horse. She wasn't going down without a fight, and that was something he respected. Caleb signaled for Elias to circle left while he took the right. They'd done this 100 times before, their bond as twins making their movements almost instinctive. The bandits had made camp in a shallow clearing, their confidence arrogance in these parts. They thought the wilderness was theirs for the taking, that no one would dare challenge them. They were wrong. Elias crept closer, his breath steady, his hand resting on the hilt of his hunting knife. The girl was tied to a tree at the edge of the camp, her dark eyes scanning the forest like she was willing someone, anyone, to come for her. When their eyes met, Elias put a finger to his lips, signaling for silence. She nodded almost imperceptibly, her jaw set in defiance. Caleb let out a low whistle, the sound mimicking the call of a night bird. It was the signal. Elias lunged from the shadows, his knife flashing in the fading light. The first bandit didn't even have time to scream before he crumpled to the ground. Chaos erupted. The remaining men scrambled for their rifles, but the twins were already among them, their movements a blur of fury and precision. Within minutes, it was over. The bandits lay scattered, groaning or still, their reign of terror ended in the span of a heartbeat. Elias cut the girl's bonds, his hands lingering just a moment too long. She rubbed her wrists, her eyes never leaving his. "You're late," she said, her voice husky but steady. Caleb chuckled, wiping blood from his knife onto his buckskin pants. "Darlin', we're right on time." She didn't smile, but there was a flicker of something in her gaze. Gratitude, maybe, or something deeper. "I'm Ayanna," she said, as if the name itself was a challenge. The twins introduced themselves, their voices rough from years of silence broken only by the wind and the occasional growl of a bear. Elias offered her a canteen, and she drank deeply, water dripping down her chin. She was beautiful in a way that made the wilderness seem tame by comparison, wild, untouched, and dangerous. "We can't stay here," Caleb said, his eyes scanning the tree line. "They'll have lookouts. More could come." Ayanna nodded, her fingers curling around the hilt of a knife she'd snatched from one of the fallen bandits. "I know these hills better than they do. There's a cave not far from here, hidden safe." Elias studied her for a long moment before nodding. "Lead the way." The cave was deeper than it looked, the entrance barely more than a crack in the rock face. Inside, the air was cool and damp, the scent of earth and old fires lingering in the darkness. Ayanna struck flint to steel, igniting a small fire in the center of the cave. The flickering light cast shadows on the walls, making the twins look even more formidable than they already were. Caleb tossed a rabbit he'd snared onto the fire, the scent of cooking meat filling the space. Ayanna sat cross-legged near the flames, her eyes reflecting the dance of the firelight. She was quiet, but the twins could feel the tension radiating off her like heat from a stove. "You're not like them," she said suddenly, her voice cutting through the silence. Elias looked up from sharpening his knife. "Like who?" "The men who took me. The men who think this land is theirs to take, to ruin." She gestured vaguely toward the cave entrance, as if the entire world outside was her enemy. Caleb leaned back against the cave wall, his arms crossed. "We're not here to take anything, Ayanna. Just passing through." She smirked, a sharp, knowing look. "Men like you are never just passing through." Elias met her gaze, unflinching. And what kind of men are we? The kind who know how to survive, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. The kind who don't need anyone. The fire crackled between them, the only sound in the heavy silence. Outside, the wind howled like a pack of wolves, but in here, it was just the three of them. 3 souls bound by the wilderness and the unspoken understanding that none of them were as alone as they thought. The firelight flickered across Ayana's face, highlighting the sharp angles of her cheekbones and the defiance in her dark eyes. She was a storm waiting to break, and the twins could feel it. The cave, though small, felt even smaller with the 3 of them huddled inside, the weight of the day's events pressing down like the low ceiling of rock above their heads. Caleb broke the silence first, tossing a strip of dried venison toward Ayana. Eat. You'll need your strength. She caught it without a word, her fingers brushing against the rough fabric of his sleeve. The contact was brief, but it sent a jolt through him, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not since the last winter they'd spent trapped in these mountains, when the cold had been so bitter it had seeped into their bones and the only warmth had come from the fire and the rare, fleeting touch of another human. Elias watched the exchange, his expression unreadable. He'd always been the quieter of the two, the one who observed more than he spoke, who let his actions do the talking. But there was something about Ayana that made even him restless. Maybe it was the way she carried herself, like she was part of the land itself, wild, untamed, and just as dangerous. You said you know these hills, Elias said, his voice low. How long have you been here? Ayana tore a piece of venison with her teeth, chewing slowly before answering. All my life. My people have lived in these mountains since before the white man came, before the bandits, before any of this. She gestured vaguely toward the cave entrance, her voice tinged with bitterness. But they don't understand that. They think they can take what isn't theirs. Caleb's jaw tightened. We've seen it before. Men who think the land owes them something. And what about you? She challenged, her eyes locking onto his. What do you think you're owed? Caleb held her gaze, unflinching. Nothing. We take what we need, nothing more. Ayana let out a humorless laugh. That's what they all say. The fire crackled between them, the only sound in the heavy silence. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, a lonely, mournful sound that seemed to echo the tension in the cave. Elias shifted, his hand resting on the hilt of his knife. We're not them, Ayana. She studied him for a long moment, her expression softening just a fraction. No, she admitted finally. You're not. The admission hung in the air, a fragile truce between them. The twins had saved her, but trust wasn't something given lightly in these parts. Not when survival depended on knowing who to trust and who to fear. As the night wore on, the fire burned low, the embers glowing like dying stars in the darkness. Ayana curled up near the fire, her body tense even in sleep. The twins took turns keeping watch, their instincts honed by years of living on the edge of civilization. Elias sat near the cave entrance, his rifle resting across his knees, his eyes scanning the darkness outside. Caleb sat closer to Ayana, his back against the cave wall, his thoughts as restless as the wind. He watched her sleep, the rise and fall of her chest steady, her features softened by the flickering light. She looked younger like this, vulnerable in a way she'd never allow herself to be while awake. Caleb felt a pang of something unfamiliar in his chest, something that wasn't just the usual hunger or the ache of tired muscles. It was deeper, sharper, like the bite of a winter wind. Elias's voice cut through the silence, low and rough. You feel it too, don't you? Caleb didn't need to ask what he meant. He just nodded, his throat tight. She's not like anyone we've met before. No, Elias agreed. She's not. They lapsed back into silence, the weight of their unspoken thoughts pressing down on them. They'd spent their lives avoiding attachments, avoiding anything that could tie them down or slow them down. The wilderness was their home, their only loyalty to each other and the land itself. But Ayana was different. She was part of that land, part of the wildness that called to them. A sound outside the cave shattered the stillness, a snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves. Elias was on his feet in an instant, his rifle raised. Caleb moved silently to Ayana's side, shaking her awake. She was alert in an instant, her eyes wide and dark in the dim light. "Bandits," she whispered. Elias shook his head, his expression grim. "Don't know. But we're not taking any chances." The three of them moved to the cave entrance, their bodies tense, their senses heightened. The night was black, the moon hidden behind a veil of clouds. The wind had died down, leaving the forest eerily silent. Then, a voice cut through the darkness, low, guttural, and familiar. "Carter twins. Knew it was you." Iana's breath hitched. She recognized that voice. It belonged to the leader of the bandits, the man who had taken her from her village. The man who had looked at her with eyes full of greed and cruelty. Elias's grip tightened on his rifle. "Show yourself." A figure stepped into the dim light of the cave entrance, his silhouette tall and broad. He was alone, but that didn't mean others weren't lurking in the shadows. The bandit leader smirked, his teeth white in the darkness. "Hand over the girl, and I'll let you walk away. You've got no stake in this fight." Caleb let out a low, dangerous laugh. "You're the one with no stake here. This is our land now." The bandit's smirk faded, his eyes narrowing. "You're making a mistake." Iana stepped forward, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her stomach. "He's right. You should leave." The bandit's gaze flicked to her, his expression darkening. "You're coming with me, girl. One way or another." Elias raised his rifle, the barrel pointed directly at the bandit's chest. "Not tonight." The bandit's hand twitched toward his pistol, but before he could draw, a shot rang out, echoing through the forest like thunder. The bandit crumpled to the ground, his body lifeless before it even hit the dirt. Silence followed, thick and heavy. The twins stood frozen, their eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. But there was nothing. Just the wind, picking up again, whispering through the trees. Iana let out a shaky breath, her hands trembling at her sides. He wasn't alone. Elias nodded, his expression grim. "We need to move. Now." The cave was no longer safe. Elias didn't need to say it. Caleb and Iana already knew. The bandits would be coming, and they wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted. Or until they were all dead. Iana moved quickly, gathering her few belongings, a knife, a small pouch of herbs, the tattered remnants of her dress. The twins watched her, their expressions unreadable in the dim light. There was no time for words, no time for hesitation. The wilderness didn't forgive mistakes. Elias slung his rifle over his shoulder and nodded toward the back of the cave. "There's a narrow passage here. It'll take us up to the ridge. From there, we can lose them in the pines." Caleb didn't question him. He never did. The twins had spent their lives reading the land, knowing its secrets like the back of their hands. If Elias said there was a way out, there was a way out. Iana followed them into the darkness, her heart pounding in her chest. She could hear the distant shouts of the bandits, their voices echoing through the forest like the howls of wolves. They were close. Too close. The passage was tight, the walls pressing in on either side. Iana could feel the rough stone against her shoulders, the damp earth beneath her feet. The air was thick with the scent of moss and old water, the kind of smell that clung to the back of your throat. She kept her breathing steady, her fingers curled around the hilt of her knife. If they caught her again, she wouldn't go down without a fight. Elias led the way, his movements sure and silent. Caleb brought up the rear, his eyes scanning the darkness behind them. The passage twisted and turned, the walls seeming to close in tighter with every step. Iana could feel the weight of the mountain above them, the ancient stone pressing down like the hand of fate. Then, suddenly, the passage opened up. Cool night air rushed in, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. Elias stepped out first, his rifle raised as he scanned the ridge. The forest stretched out before them, a sea of shadows beneath the starless sky. Caleb followed, his hand on Iana's arm as he guided her out of the passage. "Stay low," he murmured, his voice barely audible over the wind. Iana nodded, her eyes wide as she took in the view. The ridge was steep, the drop on either side sheer and unforgiving. One wrong step, and they'd be tumbling into the darkness below. But the bandits wouldn't dare follow them here. Not unless they had a death wish. Elias didn't waste time. He moved along the ridge, his steps sure and steady. Iona followed, her heart in her throat. The wind whipped at her hair, tugging at her clothes like ghostly fingers. She could hear the distant shouts of the bandits below, their voices growing fainter with every step. They didn't stop until they reached a small clearing, hidden among the pines. The trees here were thick, their branches forming a natural canopy overhead. The ground was soft with fallen needles, the scent of resin heavy in the air. Elias lowered his rifle, his breath coming in short, sharp bursts. "We'll rest here. Just for a while." Caleb nodded, his eyes scanning the tree line. "They won't find us here. Not tonight." Iona sank to the ground, her legs trembling beneath her. The adrenaline that had kept her going was fading, leaving her exhausted and hollow. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to ward off the chill that had seeped into her bones. Elias knelt beside her, his voice low. "You did good." She looked up at him, her dark eyes reflecting the faint light of the stars. "We're not safe yet." "No," he agreed. "But we're alive. That's something." Caleb crouched beside them, his expression grim. "They'll keep coming. Men like that, they don't give up." Iona's fingers tightened around her knife. "Then we'll be ready." The night wore on, the forest silent except for the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant call of a night bird. The twins took turns keeping watch, their eyes sharp in the darkness. Iona sat between them, her body tense, her mind racing. She thought of her village, of the people she had left behind. She thought of the bandits, their faces twisted with greed and cruelty. And she thought of the twins, these two men who had appeared out of nowhere, like ghosts of the wilderness. They were nothing like the men she knew. They were rough, hardened by years of survival, but there was something else in them, something wild and untamed, something that called to her. Elias shifted beside her, his shoulder brushing against hers. The contact was brief, but it sent a jolt through her, like the spark of flint against steel. She looked up at him, her breath catching in her throat. He met her gaze, his eyes dark and unreadable. "You should sleep," he said, his voice rough. "While you can." Iona shook her head. "I can't." Caleb let out a low chuckle, his voice breaking the tension. "None of us can. Not tonight." She managed a small smile, the first one since the bandits had taken her. It felt strange, foreign, like something she'd almost forgotten how to do. Elias reached into his pack and pulled out a small pouch. "Here," he said, handing it to her. "Dried meat. It's not much, but it'll keep you going." Iona took it, her fingers brushing against his. The touch was fleeting, but it lingered in her mind, warm and solid. She ate slowly, savoring the taste, the feel of the food grounding her. Caleb watched her, his expression softening just a fraction. "You're stronger than you look." She met his gaze, her eyes flashing with defiance. "I'm stronger than most." He smirked, a sharp, knowing look. "I don't doubt it." Dawn came slowly, the first light of morning creeping through the trees like a thief. The forest was quiet, the bandit shouts long since faded into the distance. For now, they were safe. Iona stood, stretching her stiff muscles. The twins watched her, their expressions unreadable. She turned to them, her voice steady. "What now?" Elias exchanged a glance with Caleb before answering. "Now we move. We can't stay here. They'll keep looking." Iona nodded, her jaw set with determination. "Then I'm coming with you." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "You don't even know where we're going." "Doesn't matter," she said, her voice firm. "I'm not going back. Not to them. Not to anyone." Elias studied her for a long moment before nodding. "All right. But you follow our lead. No arguments." Iona smirked. "No promises." Caleb let out a low laugh, the sound rumbling through the quiet forest. "She's got spirit, Elias." "I like her." Elias didn't answer, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, something that looked almost like approval. They moved through the forest like shadows, their steps silent, their movements fluid. The twins led the way, their instincts guiding them through the dense undergrowth. Ayana followed, her eyes sharp, her senses heightened. She could feel the wilderness around her, the ancient pulse of the land beneath her feet. It was a part of her, just as it was a part of the twins. They were all bound by it, shaped by it, their fates intertwined in ways none of them could have predicted. As the sun rose higher, the forest came alive around them. The rustle of leaves, the call of birds, the distant rush of a river. They were heading deeper into the mountains, away from the bandits, away from the world that had tried to break them.